So
Great.
hi, and welcome to Cool People. So over the last couple of years, since starting my transition, I've met a lot of amazing people since doing my trans awareness training courses and also my public speaking about trans issues. And I've met loads of people in the diversity and inclusion world, and they've all got incredible stories to tell. And so what I wanted to do with this series of Cool People is to basically share my friends with you. And so one of my friends who I would like to share with you is the latest cool person to talk to me here, is a fantastic person called Leng Montgomery. And he's a diversity and inclusion specialist and also a TED Talk speaker. So he's very experienced and very well known. So thank you ever so much, Leng, for agreeing to do this. So welcome to Cool People.
Well, thank you, Katie. That is a lovely welcome. It's lovely to be here. And it's a shame that we still keep saying we'll have that coffee or drink, but every single time it gets scuppered. And this time we've been coronaed, literally.
We've definitely been
coronaed. But it's still a pleasure to be here. So I think really a bit like what we've been talking about before, and where I'd like to go there is that I've now, I think one thing about trans people, and particularly trans and non-binary people, is that we all have very, very different stories. We all have very, very different experiences as well. In my case, I feel almost like a veteran trans in some ways. Because I've not just because I've started to get receding hair and grey hair everywhere, and Corona has messed up the fact that I should have been to a barber. So I'm really sorry about my appalling hair at the moment.
Well, I think we're all going to get longer hair and greyer hair, aren't we? As this goes on, I think it's going to be interesting.
By the end of this, I'm going to look like one of the Beatles when they have their very long hairs and beards, I think.
Just think it's so lucky that you're being interviewed right at the start of this. Yeah, think what it's going to be like in a few weeks' time, not years, hopefully, a few weeks' time. So,
well, in my case, I started my transition about 11 years ago now. And sometimes I feel like it was yesterday, and other days I kind of feel like, oh my goodness, that was such a long time ago, or so many things have happened in that time. So, I suppose really everyone always knows at a different time when they were first trans. I first knew when I was a very small child, to be honest.
What was the age?
I was about 3 or 4.
Same for me. Yeah.
And I remember the first thing I got in trouble for at school was hiding. There was this really, how like little girls would have those horrible sort of swimming crop top things, and also it was the 1980s at the time, so maybe I was just offended on how hideous it looked. But, I've always been LGBT. That's one thing for sure in my time. It's sort of it felt wrong. I used to and weirdly, even my other classmates would sort of say, "Well, she's a boy." And I remember that was something that would be said. But then obviously I was told very distinctly by a teacher when I was about 5 that, I can't be a boy, I'm a girl, I need to accept that, because I remember once we were having a school play and I was asked to wear a skirt and I had a massive tantrum. I just refused to wear it. I actually locked myself in a room because I just wouldn't come out, and I just couldn't bear it. And the weird thing is I wasn't a very tantrumy child. There were very few things that would actually make me become quite sort of confrontative or defiant, but that was definitely something that always, because it felt wrong to me, it just didn't feel it was me. As I grew older, obviously, you live in your sort of enforced gender, because that's what it kind of feels like for a long time. And, when puberty came, that was just a massive distressing moment for me in my life. I did, through some of the moments of my teenage years, I did find that I was very, very depressed. And I couldn't quite identify that for a while. I thought it must be this, it must be that, it must be various other things, because there've been some other things that happened in my childhood as well that weren't very great either. I'd been in a household that unfortunately had quite a lot of domestic violence that was aimed at my mother in there and things like that. So I was actually quite you know, a lot of the time, some of the depressions or anxieties I was having, I thought, well, is it related to that? You know, sort of. And I think that's the other problem with mental health things as well. We always have to try and find a way of neatly explaining it, or it has to have a clear reason, or it has to be clearly put to bed on something, you know. Whereas actually sometimes, you know, and this is where I think some of those messaging things about it's okay not to be okay, or talking about it, well, that's where it gets a bit contradictory, because at the same time people always want to know what's what, you know, what's the root of it. And I even do it for myself now, you know. So sometimes I know that I will diagnose things in a way that, you know, I'll be very clear on the fact that maybe I'm feeling not so happy because of a very specific reason, and having to feel like it's justified, when really I know that in the wider scheme of things, we maybe shouldn't have to think like that, but I know that we still do.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry to digress there. So as a teenager, I also came out when I was 15 as a lesbian. And, you know, that in itself was because I felt for a very long time that I thought, well, I definitely feel, particularly when it comes to sexual orientation, that, you know, I thought I definitely know that I'm someone that has got a queer soul, or that, you know, I am not heterosexual. That's something that I've always known very, very clearly. But there was still always this feeling, because even though I felt very, you know, I've had some great relationships when I lived as a woman, very loving relationships, lots of, you know, nothing negative there, but there was always something that I felt that was very missing, and I felt so miserable in some of these relationships as well. And it wasn't until I was 25 that I decided, after following a breakup that I had, it was quite a few months after the breakup as well. I just I knew that this was something that this was what it was. And I discovered that through the fact that I'd noticed, you know, even now, I don't really have many trans best friends as such, you know, sort of, it's not like someone just tapped me on the shoulder one day and was like, you know, this is who you are, or, you know, put a binder on, or, you
No.
know, anything like that. In fact, I still pretty much, you know, a lot of my circle of friends actually, or people that I've known that could influence, or social, you know, that I maybe was influenced by, were people that are mostly cis, people that were mostly straight, people that were mostly lesbian and gay, and a couple of bi people, you know. So one myth that I really, really think it's really important to know is that there is not this all powerful trans lobby that kind of sits there trying to convince people
No.
that it's something in there, nor is it a trend. And I get very frustrated at the sort of conflation, or the sort of the fact that people try and say this is a trendy thing, when the amount of social stigma, violence, and exclusion that happen as a result of this is not trendy. You are not, you know, if anything, being trans and starting to transition, you are not picking the trendy group at all of people to be assigning yourself to or linking to. So I think that's something that really, really needs to be said. Nor do you transition to be permanently oppressed either. And that's something that I think is also wrong with the way that people behave. But anyway,
Yeah.
you know, and the other thing was, then this is the really controversial fact, and not many people know this, because I mentioned earlier on about the fact that, you know, I'd been brought up in a household where my mum had a boyfriend for a number of years that was very violent towards her. Ironically, there was another moment for me where, even though I knew I was male, I kind of didn't like men very much.
Okay.
And that was a hard one to reconcile in my head, because I just thought, well, I sort of know I am a man, but I really don't like them, or
Mm.
a lot of them anyway. And but at the same time, I thought, but I know who I am, and you know, so it was this whole horrible debate that was sort of going round and round in my head. But I sort of, in the end, I settled with something which a lot of people will probably roll their eyes at me at. And even it's a saying that even I was like, well, actually, I've repurposed the saying, so I'll just be clear on this. But I just thought, well, okay, not all men, you know, because I know people use that as an excuse a lot of the time. But I thought, actually, the good thing is that I can be my own version of a man. I can be my own man, actually, or be the man that other men should be. And, you know, fortunately, being brought up in a very strong female household, you know, sort of I've seen, and also seeing other areas of where really toxic masculine behavior can really, really be really destructive. I feel it's really shaped a lot of who I am. And also I know what's right and what's wrong. And, I feel fed up of the fact that, and patriarchy does hurt everyone, because I think sort of having to be a hyper masculine or hyper feminine version of anything is impossible. And also it's going to create stereotypes. It oppresses people. And also, it's ridiculous if you're a man that it's seen that you're weak for talking about your feelings. It's ridiculous if you can't be vulnerable. And, I've had, and the thing is, when I first started to transition, I had a lot of support from people. I still have, which has been really good. Although I did notice some differences. It was interesting, the more sort of male I sort of became, or sort of started to present as, I should say, because I've always sort of been pretty much me. There's just all these gendered stereotypes that were flying out of nowhere that I was really interested in. And actually quite a lot of people that had any views on anything or had any sort of opinion of what I should or shouldn't be were all female. So when I told someone once that, and quite a few that identify as feminists as well. So, unconscious bias, basically, I think is something that can exist with us all. Yeah. And I think we all, just because we are part of a group or a minority group or, a community that may be a bit more oppressed or be a bit more marginalized, we are still capable of stereotyping and basically being an arse, and I'll be really blunt about that and that's also non-gender specific. So I used arse quite deliberately. I do work in D&I.
I did say you were very experienced.
But, I was told things like, when I told someone I was feeling a bit depressed, I'm like, oh, come on, well, now you're a man, when you start having testosterone, because that's the thing, I didn't start taking hormones until at least 2.5 years into transition either. So I've taken things really, really slowly, if anything. But, I was told that, come on, like, boys don't cry. And I was really shocked at that. And, you're a man, you've got to be big and tough now. Or, and just at the time when I talked about crying, again, it was boys don't cry, and I was told that I need to man up because I was told that nobody will love or want a soft man. Really? And again, this was coming from a woman. Really? And my point on this is the fact that, I did feel a bit of despair at that moment, to be entirely honest, because I just sort of thought, well, on the one aspect, we criticize men about not being in touch with their feelings, or they're not doing enough of a certain thing, or they're not being vulnerable. But then when men do try and do things, well, then I've seen quite clearly where they're shut down and being ridiculed or being really even further shamed over it. And shame is quite deadly. And then suddenly I started to think to myself, now I know why so many men don't talk about their feelings. They go quiet and then they top themselves, because I thought that would explain with all those statistics why all those things work together. So again, having that unique viewpoint of having been living under two identities in my life, sort of living female and now in a male identity, I feel it has given me quite a unique viewpoint. I've also, I found that, yes, I have had acceptance. I've managed to have relationships. But it's still a challenge, because as soon as people know that you're trans, there are sometimes issues where there's always a but, or for some reason your trans identity somehow becomes a threat to what their base sexual orientation is or who they are. And the thing is, within this period of time, so as I said before, I was a lesbian. Well, obviously I'm a bit too hairy to be one now. So, well, that's true. But, but at the same time, I've realized that our sexual orientation can evolve. It can move around. And for me, I still don't identify as straight. I'm just, I've started to say I'm bi more than anything, because I definitely flirt with men. I definitely have sort of attraction to them, but I've also had relationships still with women mostly. And, but at the same time, I don't go out and target women, and again, I just find this language that's put around trans people is really horrible, sort of implying that people are really predatory when, I was a bit shy before, I still am now. I still never make the first move with anyone. I'm not that likely. And also partly because of being male and realizing what men can represent to other people as well. I'm quite conscious about boundaries, consent, all of those things. They're really, really important to me. Absolutely. And and the other thing I hate is when people are being very presumptuous. So just because I'm enjoying a conversation, maybe there's a bit of mild flirtation, it doesn't always have to have some form of sexual gratification at the end of that. That's not correct.
No.
So, if anything, I just sort of I found that I've become a lot more shy than I was. I was more bold, I'd say, when I was a lesbian than I am now. Sort of, I'm a lot more sort of, I'd just say, yeah, I'm just a lot shyer. And I think because I'm more careful, but I think there is that anxiety that, I don't want to be accused of inappropriate behaviour with someone, or someone feeling that I was forcing myself on them. And I think because of some of the negative stereotypes in place around transgender people and trans community as well, it's made me really, really anxious at times. So there is that impact. But aside that, because I just think that's something that is a work in progress, and I will not, in some situations, okay, maybe I'll end up friend zoned more than anything else in my life, but fair enough. If that means that I'm not being perceived as someone that's being really predatory, well, fine. I'd rather have that, because I do not want to be seen as a negative predatory man, and I know that's not who I am. So the only other areas that I've sort of really had to fight a bit more for space, because I think when you're socialized as a woman, you don't really know what to do with space sometimes. And what I mean is, because a lot of the time you're being pushed out of spaces a lot of the time, or as a woman you're socialized not to take up too much space. So obviously when you enter life as a man in that way, even I find myself in that sort of awkward moment of like, oh yeah, I can actually have this space, but I need to remember that. But then I think, oh no, but then there's this other person and there's that. And so, that's an ongoing thing that I keep doing. But again, I do get very annoyed with any stereotypes that imply that trans men in particular are these sort of testosterone-fueled Neanderthals whose fists are scraping the floor, because it's not quite like that. And testosterone, you can't pick up cars with your little finger. I was really disappointed to discover that. But all you do is get hairy, and your fat goes from your arse to your belly. That's sort of the main thing that you end up getting. So, and some thinning hair now, and some whiskers. So that's what you get. But when it came to employment, that's when I realized there was a whole new world of something out there, because I could not get a job for nearly 3 years. I mean, I even gave a TED talk about it. But, but overall, what I've noticed is that in employment or employers, I think it's very good that, yes, we've got more organizations that are proudly patting themselves on the back for celebrating things like Transgender Day of Visibility. Great, you've got a policy. But, when people announce they've just made a policy, I just think, well, why wasn't that there in the first place? Sometimes, it's like saying we've put in a maternity leave policy, which I know some SME businesses haven't quite put that in there. But if you're a slightly larger or medium business, there's no excuse for you not to. And I just think having a good range of policies, it's like the HR first aid kit. You might not need that bandage or plaster at a particular time, but there's that one day when you need that particular thing that you never quite knew how it opened in the first place, and that's usually what it's like.
I think there's an awful lot of catching up to do at the moment, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think also it's just about being reflective of the societies we're in. Now, so many companies love to make a big noise. They love the visionary statement of, we want our people to bring be their whole selves at work, or bring their whole selves to work. I'm like, well, make sure they're recognised in your policies. It's quite simple, and also don't just wait until someone transitions before you then suddenly cobble together a policy, because otherwise it becomes what I call a HR hot potato.
Yeah,
it goes all over the place. Exactly.
I've had several HR people said to me, it's that oh shit moment. It's like they sort of come out of being trans.
In fact, if I was going to interview someone to be a manager, like my killer question would be, okay, without going to HR, how would you support a colleague through transition?
Yeah.
And I could imagine, well, I have actually asked that question of people, because I sometimes, not often, but I have sat in interviews in my time. And sometimes it's been interesting, especially if someone's at the leadership level, or, especially when I look at more people-based behaviours, about what people do. And there are some people that, had a brilliant response and a brilliant attitude to it. There's been other people that I was quite shocked at the level of hostility from them. And actually it helped me in an interview once see someone that quite clearly I thought could really give a good talk, or they'd read certain areas of the website. It was quite evident by the way they had this sort of candor about things. However, when it came to the people thing, they almost, they became borderline aggressive about it. And I was like, that's quite interesting that there was that level of, because I thought, I don't trust you as a leader at all. If seeing that little flash of, basically, because I thought actually what I was feeling from the situation was that, I thought, oh, it's all well and good if you feel in control of something, but if you don't feel in control of something, you become a little bit of a loose cannon. And I thought, actually, when people are going to look to you to be a leader in a situation, could I put all my trust in you? Probably not.
No.
And also to be asking anyway, like, well, why would I be dealing with this anyway? Sort of, it's like, well, that's not the point. It's the whole point. I thought you're not engaging in the way that there should be a people focus. So, I was quite pleased that that was someone that didn't go through, because I was quite amazed at how suddenly they changed from being charm itself to, sort of quite. And as we know in interviews, that's not always the best way of securing your.
No.
But then sometimes being yourself is not always the best way of securing your position. Because that's the main thing I discovered over a 3-year period, was that definitely I gave some bad applications, like I'm not going to, it can't, but at the same time, I realized there was a very interesting relationship I spotted when I became, the more open I was about myself to how my succession rate was going. And it was at that point I thought there's definitely some bias in place. And then a couple of years ago, there was actually an anonymous survey given out by a company, and 1 in 3 firms and organizations in the country were on it, because it was super anonymous, were honest about the fact. They said they were less likely to hire someone that was trans. And I think that's definitely the case. I know loads of people that since...
Wasn't that Crossland's employment solicitors?
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And, I found that in those situations, we are still at a point where there is not enough going on. And I think, my challenge I still give to companies now is, I think, great, you've got your policies, some of you are even really loudly talking about trans day visibility, all that stuff. Now, can you go and hire some trans people?
Yeah.
From the outside in. It's not just about how you deal or support or contain someone from within so you don't get sued, because that's basically what goes on a lot of the time. It's backside covering. It's about, what are you going to actually do next? So I feel that, and also companies that really, really celebrate that in people, I think are going to go far. I mean, the role that I'm in now currently, there's a whole emphasis, particularly BDO, about being yourself, and be yourself is something that's really actually spoken about, particularly to do with culture and particularly the inclusion aspects of things. Now, when I was asked that question in an interview, it was the most cocky I think I've ever sounded in my life, because I didn't mean to actually. I was a bit like, whoops. I've found having 2 coffees before an interview and a bit of anxiety and imposter syndrome, that can be quite a combination. But, I just said, well, I've made a whole career out of it. And I just explained very matter of fact who I was, what I was doing, also professionally what I've been doing. And they gave me the job. So I was like, great, and they've still kept me in the job at the moment. So I was like, thank you. But for many years, it's the struggle that I had that that's what really, the thing within that struggle though, is that's what's put me on the career path that I'm on now. Because I thought, and when I realized that there was a whole role or a whole, whole sort of industry of diversity and inclusion, which would look at this kind of stuff that isn't just trans, but everything else. And because I thought there is something in here. And I think that within employment now, we need to do better. The things like the gender pay gap and ethnicity pay gaps and things like that, they can be absolved. Well, actually, really, there should be more equalised pay anyway. That's your first step to anything. But number 2, there should not be situations. But the other problem is representation, and a lot of that is down to the attraction and also how are you setting people up for success. Is setting people up for success actually part of your company's cultural DNA? Because if it's not, that's also a big problem. So, but I think trans people are still being looked at as this sort of really niche, strange other group that are just sort of they're a problem, or they're just not ever part of anything. They're always separate, and that's sort of, they're always othered. And I think that othering is what is really, really dangerous.
Yeah.
Because even when it comes to making inclusive design or inclusive business decisions, people think, oh, well, there's only just one of those people. Well, yeah, there is sometimes, but actually, if we talk about being more gender neutral in terms of good practice, that's something that actually isn't always a trans issue. As I point out time and time again, when people get snippy about emails, or when people put pronouns in email signatures, which I think is really good practice, I point out it's not just a trans thing, because as I point out, in lots of companies, how many Alexes have we met?
Yeah.
And there are lots of Alexes that get quite annoyed with, not being addressed in the way they want to. Also, there are people who have names that, again, can be totally gender neutral. And also, there are other people who have names that maybe we're not very familiar with. So actually, in terms of courtesy, if people want to be addressed in a certain way, I think a lot of the time I've learned, particularly since transition, people want to get it right a lot of the time. There are some people that don't want to get it right because they're just being nasty. But actually, on the whole, people want to get it right. So
I found that too. I found that most people do want to get it right, and they get upset when they get it wrong, and I think that's where
and quite often they want to know how they can, or they want the tools in order to do that. So I think by empowering people and sharing those things, it's not really a big issue. And I get very annoyed with, you get naysayers that kind of come out with stuff like, well, people should, well, it's obvious who I am. Well, good for you. But, it's kind of, I just think, well, if people want to be more inclusive, let them be more inclusive. And it's just a case of just allowing that space. So, like I say, eventually I did manage to get myself into a career trajectory. So I spent some time at Stonewall, then I moved to Sainsbury's, then I had some time at Cushman & Wakefield, and now I'm at BDO. I've also worked freelance as a consultant for quite a number of years as well. So within that sort of space, I've worked through lots of different industries, and I've also just been very lucky just to meet lots of people. And particularly in inclusion sort of events and circles, I find people, they really are a lot more collaborative, because with inclusion, it's not about having a competition with each other. In fact, you all want to collectively problem solve and drive change together. So I think that's something that's really, really good to look at. And also, I think the main thing that I've really enjoyed, or the thing that I love most about my work, is getting to work with really senior leaders as well, and sitting in boardrooms and people at that level, because I've had some really interesting conversations and understanding change. But also the other areas that I think we need to remember, everyone in the organisation. I've worked with so many charismatic and fantastic network leaders as well, particularly for employee engagement side. But I think also it's the middle manager population. Having a brilliant middle manager is sometimes like trying to cut hen's teeth sometimes in certain areas. And actually, in a lot of cases, in terms of retention, so many people are willing to stay at their job, and because they just don't want to ever lose having such a great manager. On the other side of that, lots of people will leave their job because of how their manager behaves. So, I think there's a lot of areas of that to uncover. But overall, I think things are getting slightly better. And as a lead myself, I do make myself visible, even though sometimes I am the only one in the room, because I think it's important that people know that there are different types of people out there. And also, I think if I'm going to be leading on activity that talks about people being themselves, and then I'm hiding myself away, that kind of is a bit of a contradiction in terms. And that might not look so good on my work KPIs. It's like, but I think employment is still an area to go. And I think overall there still needs to be a lot more training, and there needs to be just less anxiety about, I haven't had any coffee this morning, so I'm just
you need a caffeine injection.
No, I'm like, I do feel that overall we need to move to a position and a point where, there is just less anxiety about someone who's trans joining a team. I mean, certain companies are really getting it right. And also there's a lot more inclusion now of people that are non-binary. So I think, again, just having more open conversations. But I think just realizing that our workforces now are so different. And actually, when we think about, or we talk about who, where people have relationships or what those relationships look like. They're not always heterosexual. We've started to move to we've sort of started to acknowledge that there can be that. Although I think there should be a bit more work in the bi inclusion space, because I find that definitely, people like myself, you have to come out all the time, or you have to really specifically state the gender of who, or the gender identity of someone that you're with a lot of the time, which can be good, but it's interesting, or having to caveat that you're bi. If people look at you a bit confused, if they know that you've maybe had a female partner and now maybe you have a male partner.
I've got quite a few bi friends, and I think they're certainly a long way behind lesbian and gay people. I think bi, there's a lot of people just don't know that much about it, and there's still quite a bit of stigma. And I think there's actually quite a lot of solidarity between bi people and trans people. I think because we've all got this we've still got this sort of stigma, haven't we? And we're still trying to fight it, really.
There is definitely a stigma, and I think it's it's something that I think we're all working on, and it's something to keep going with, But in terms of other areas of society, there is a bit more acceptance in some areas, but then, as we know, it's like one step forward, five back in some areas. So, but the main thing that I really, really cannot emphasize enough is the fact that, in the 11 years, this year will be my 11th year of transitioning. I've had, being myself, and, it's been something that the only difficult parts of me being trans or having a trans identity have come from people who are hostile to people, against people that have a trans identity or not understanding enough. And in medical situations, there are still situations where even doctors don't get it. So it's kind of, I think that there needs to be more of an awareness. And I'm very aware of the privileges that I sit on too. Like at the moment, I feel very privileged because I work. I'm able to work at the moment. Given with this global pandemic, I'm so lucky to have a job. But I know exactly how painful it is when you can't get work. And I think just where possible, you share and you do what you can. I'm also very privileged in the respect that I know that unless I tell people a lot of the time, they do not know I'm transgender.
No.
And that's the other challenge that I give people, because when they go, "Oh, I don't think I've met someone that's trans," I'll say that you know of, because not everyone has a sign above their. Well, I haven't ever seen anyone with a sign above their head apart from at Pride page, so there's that. But you don't often get those areas happening, and I also think it's just really, really important to bear that in mind, that people are different. We celebrate that. We should be celebrating that.
I mean, I was at a networking meeting recently. Now I know obviously I've still got a deep voice, and so that often gives me away, and I tend to sort of assume that people know because my voice is still quite deep, and I'm a work in progress, because I'm still in transition and still working on it. But I was at a business networking meeting recently, and I was chatting to this lady, and we were chatting for about 10 minutes, and we were talking about sort of the stuff that she was doing to begin with, and then she came on to asking me what I did, because it's the usual thing, and of course I said, well, I've got two businesses. I'm a photographer and filmmaker, but I'm also a trans ambassador, because I do trans awareness training and public speaking about it, because I'm transgender. And she looked at me, and there's shock on her face, and she said, "Oh, I didn't realise at all." I thought that really made my day when she said that. It was fantastic. And she said, "Oh, I want to give you a hug. Can I give you?" This was before coronavirus, of course. Yeah. I want to give you a hug. So go on. So she gave me this hug, and
I'd have been like, "It's a trap."
I know. And then she promptly spilt all her coffee all over her, and halfway it went in my handbag. But I didn't mind, because it made my day, because she didn't realise. That was nice.
Oh, I mean, that's the thing, though. It's funny, those moments. I mean, usually with me, then, if people have been a bit shocked, they've become awkward. Or sometimes, once with me, someone misheard that I said trans, and they thought I was talking about trains, and then they started to bore me rigid with talking about the Bakerloo and Northern Line, which was a bit painful. Me rather than them. I was just like, oh no, this is, how'd you get yourself out of this? But it's one of those things that you sometimes have to know how to navigate through. And, sort of have experience. There have been people that have suddenly, that were really enjoying talking to me, as soon as they knew that, they have switched off from me, or they have started to ask me inappropriate questions, like what kind of surgeries have I had, or
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
or
I,
or
I get
people that love pointing at my groin, and like sort of. And I've been dying to put one of those fake things that explodes out one day, because I just think that would just be so funny, like maybe I'll get a Nerf gun down there.
I get that, people that have told that I'm trans, and that they immediately start asking me about surgery, and you think, well, actually, you wouldn't ask a cisgender person about
Exactly.
surgery at all. You just wouldn't. But I don't think it comes from any sort of position of malice or anything. I think it's ignorance. I think it's because there's a lack of education about trans issues, and
Massively.
they don't know enough about it, and so they think that transition is all just about surgery, and that's all it is. That's all there is to it. And so because of that, they think that they want to keep the conversation going, and so that's what they ask about. So I think it is just an education thing. So.
Yeah. No, I agree. I just, in those situations, I've sometimes just find myself becoming a bit more playful, So if and I sometimes I'll ask people about theirs, and
Yeah.
sometimes that reversal suddenly it makes people go, oh, well, that's really. I was like, that's what you asked me, or if it's. Or if it's a guy doing it to me, it's a bit naughty of me, really, but I'll admit it here, because I think I'm with friends. But I just say, much bigger than yours, and then that usually just moves everything on, and then it stops that conversation. I mean, I was talking about the size of my heart, obviously.
Absolutely.
My compassion levels,
Yeah, and what I only came out very publicly 2 years ago. I only admitted to myself I was trans on it's the 11th of January 2018, so just over 2 years ago. I've had gender dysphoria all my life, so from age 3 or 4, but actually admitting it to myself was really hard. That was the hardest thing. But that was just 2 years ago, so it must have been so much harder for you 11 years ago, because obviously things have moved on, certainly in the last 5 years, through people like you doing what you've been doing, and there's been lots of television programs about it, so there's been much more in the media, certainly, and so there's been much more awareness of it. But even then, it was still really, really hard. I didn't want to admit to myself that I was trans. So, how was that for you? So 11 years ago.
I mean, that's a great question, actually, because I found it really scary and really lonely, actually, at times, particularly because I did not see many representations or role models that were trans males.
No.
And that's one thing that I also noticed. And then I just saw that mostly trans women were being monstered in either the media or there. And it was also hard to access, or a lot of people would sort of, I don't know, it's a sort of, or I'll get people saying, well, why don't you just be a lesbian? Or why can't you be a butch lesbian? I'm like, well, that's not who I am. I would also get that from other lesbians as well.
Really?
Like, well, they're like, you look hot now, but if you're a man, I can't go out with you. And it's like, well, I'm not doing this for you. This is for me. That's sort of the.
It's just and it's not. And the other thing that gets me, people sort of, they call it a lifestyle choice. There's no choice about it. It's just who you are.
It's like, this is my life.
The only choice you have is whether you do anything about it or not. And certainly from the research that I did showed that the people generally who do something about it, okay, after the initial loss, pain and heartache, and yes, it's a bumpy journey, usually end up going to lead happy and contented lives, whereas those that don't, they're often the ones that end up in a spiral of depression, and often worse, because they're not able to live their truth. And I mean, personally, being able to live my truth now is just amazing. It just feels incredible. And though, there's lots of crap still going on, I feel brilliant in myself. It's fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
No, absolutely, and it's so it's been, the thing it's taught me is that sort of you will meet some great people along the way. There will be some bumps, but I was also very lucky in the respect that even though I don't have a very big family, I've had full support.
Wow, that's fantastic.
I've had acceptance, and I think even when I came out when I was young, my mum, for example, taught me to be very unapologetic about who I was, sort of. And I think that key area of resilience has really stayed with me, and that particularly I needed with transition, because I'm not going to apologize or be ashamed about who I am, and I never ever will feel those aspects, and nor should I. So
No.
So if anything, if people are like, yeah, you're trans, I'm like, yeah, I am. And what other point have you got with that? Is there more to come? Is there anything else factually do you want to talk about? In fact, today I'm wearing some glasses. I've now got some facial hair. Is there anything else you want to point out there? Because that's literally how I feel about it. And trans isn't the whole, isn't everything about who I am.
No.
I have lots of thoughts, interests, and other things that are really unrelated to being trans. I love cooking. I love walking. There's various things about me that not many people know, and there are so many things that don't always come back to being trans or even LGBT. So it's sort of the.
And I think that's important to point out that trans people are just ordinary people, and we've got personalities and skills and lives that's completely separate from being trans. Trans is just one part of who we are.
I love going to the supermarket. That's possibly a bit more of a niche activity because loads of people moan about it, but I actually quite like them. And that's why for a while I loved working at Sainsbury's, because I was like, wow, I get to work for a whole chain here and see how big this system is. And it is incredible. And also, even right now with coronavirus, I must say, on the note of retail, actually, is that, I fully endorse and support our NHS workers, who are absolute heroes, but so are our retail people as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They are, because also they don't get a choice to stay at home. A lot of the work that they do, they can't be at home doing it.
No, absolutely.
And even from when I've volunteered in stores at Christmas times when it's been busy, when the panic buying started, that's like Christmas times a million. People can be so rude to those people, and that is not acceptable.
No, absolutely.
And also just other habits that make people's life hard. Like, there's one habit that I will, that I will share with everyone now, particularly from working in retail, and I will always share this one out, is that where possible, if you decide you don't want a certain item, stop putting it back in the wrong place, because someone else ultimately has to do that.
Yes.
And when it's a very busy time, like when it was Christmas, I remember once I walked around with a tin of baked beans for about 2 hours because I kept getting hoiked by all these other customers. But it's very annoying when you've got loads of items in your hands.
Yeah.
When that happens, and I have put things in the wrong shelves before as well in my time, so I'm definitely holding my hand up to that one.
Yeah.
But from working in that environment and seeing how rude people can be to retail people, it's shocking. So be kind and be nice to these people, because they are working tirelessly to make sure that we are being fed and getting everything we need.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been absolute hell in the supermarkets. I'm hoping that the panic buying is starting to ease off a bit now. I've been, certainly when I've been to the supermarkets, the stuff has been getting back up there again. So hopefully people have calmed down a bit on that front. But
people seem to be calming down, so that's a positive. And as we know, kind of people do. People will just be people in this situation a bit, but it's kind of, I think we are getting to a point where when panic buying calms down, that's a good start, but we just have to, I think now people have realized that you can still go out and get some food, so you don't have to. It's not like people are buying to go into complete isolation, which is as if that's what they were thinking before.
I think that's what they were thinking before, yeah. So I think now, hopefully, they'll realise that, yes, you can still go out there, and yes, there is still food there, and so, hopefully it will calm down, and so that'll ease that situation.
It's nice that when I went to a supermarket last week, and, vegetables were back, so I was like, okay, that's a good sign. And actually, there weren't too many gaps on shelves, although there are still, people are still really going for pasta at the moment, and I don't quite know why. Because actually, in terms of versatility, rice, I'd say, is a better thing to be buying.
Probably is, yeah. You
can do a lot more with it, but I found that, by going to more of the ethnic supermarkets, they are much better. They're more stocked, and people aren't just cramming in those as well. So and also to support local shops as well. So
yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah.
that'd be my retail top tip.
Yeah, oh, brilliant. Thanks. Another thing I realised that we've got in common, I was having a look on your LinkedIn profile. I see that you've got a BA in photojournalism.
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so did you do any work for any publications at all, any photography at
all? Not for a number of years, but interestingly, but when I was at university, that really, I think, put me on, without realising, I think that put me on the career path that I'm on now. Because I, as well, apart from having direct discrimination, which sort of gave me a bit more of the impetus of thinking, well, okay, there is definitely lack of representation, and also I thought, well, what's really going on with these quotas if we look at diversity forms and monitoring and all of that kind of stuff. But when I was at university, I really, really liked to, all of my projects really focused on underrepresented groups.
Okay.
And about having their own identity and being themselves and all that stuff. And I thought, I've always sort of, in effect, had a real, and the main thing was allowing people to speak for themselves. Because if I feel that there's a group of people that have been stereotyped or depicted in a way, particularly by the media, that might not be very accurate, or maybe the main media portrayal of them is a very tiny aspect of what happens in their community or life versus what the actual lived reality is to the people. So I've always had a very keen interest in those areas. So I think now in the work that I do now, it merges those two areas very well. And and I do have an appreciation of art. I like creative things. I do like people being able to have their own voice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also I like to find out a bit more, because it's not appropriate for me to speak about the experiences of other people, but it's appropriate of me to listen and advocate, because I think that's the sort of the right way of being. And in the way that I appreciate people that stand by me as my ally, I make sure that I'm an ally to as many different groups of people as possible. Because that's how you're going to make change. And it doesn't mean that by being an ally that you're a hero. And actually, sometimes it's about sitting down and shutting up. And that actually, rather than the lean in rhetoric, it's like sit back and just be quiet and listen. Let the other people speak. Because, not everything has to be about us, and not everything has to be about what we think and what our opinion is all the time. No. Particularly if we're an ally to another group of people that aren't getting as much sort of exposure or voice that they should have. So it's that balancing act that I think we have to work on.
I'm glad you mentioned allies. Allies are just so crucial, though. There's some really good examples recently. I just before Christmas, I went to a black tie event, and it was there, and quite a lot of other people there. It was a business thing, and so there's quite a lot of people there who knew me. And there was a gentleman at the other side of the room who apparently he was having this conversation with this other gentleman, and this first one pointed me out and just said, "Well, you see that woman over there? That used to be Martin Neves, and then started sort of talking about me quite disparagingly, and but luckily the guy that he was talking to had the benefit of watching quite a few of my vlogs, and so he'd been following my journey, and so he'd been educated in about issues just from my vlogs. And he stood up for me and he just said, well, actually, there's a lot more to it than you realise, and then started educating this other bloke. And I didn't know this was going on at all. And it was only after the event that he told me, and he said that that's what had happened. And I thought, well, yeah, that's what a true ally does, because he stood up for me when I couldn't, because I didn't know the conversation was going on. I thought, well, that's fantastic. I was so pleased that he did that.
Oh, that's brilliant, because it just takes the sort of the emotional labour off you. And also it's nice to know if someone has been talking about you in a certain way, that that actually sometimes people can step forward, and and that's the other thing that I've really realised, is that I've been so lucky to have lots of different allies as well from my journey. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier on during my transition was in terms of, I haven't had much medical intervention, because I've chosen not to, and a lot of people don't. But with one particular medical intervention that I did have with my chest, for example, I had chest surgery done. That was paid for by an ally who I'd never met. So I used to keep a blog about my transition.
Really? Wow.
And then from reading my blogs, I've been having an ongoing issue with the NHS, because I'd had a name mix-up that had happened. So I was misnamed by the NHS for quite a long time, and they'd create basically a new name that had never existed. So on all my medical records, I had Miss Leng for a number of times, which I know.
Oh, no.
I mean, It would have been, if I was a stage performer, that would have been a fantastic name. But I'm too shy to be on stage, and as I've said many times, I'm the side of trans that gave up mascara. So
Yeah, that's right.
and they don't give you mascara in the NHS anyway. Just to be very, very clear, and just so no fake news starts coming out.
Oh, no. I'm so disappointed. And talking about names, how did you choose the name Leng?
It used to be my surname.
Oh, wow. Well, that's a nice thing to do then, isn't it? To keep
Yeah, I kind of reversed it, but then I found out very embarrassingly on one of the first bits of public speaking I did, actually, as about trans issues and as a trans guy. It turns out in China, or particularly in Cantonese, it means handsome, and I didn't realise that, and nor do I think myself in that way. So it was really embarrassing when someone said, "Where we are, it means handsome. Is this person handsome?" And I was like, "This is so embarrassing."
Oh God, yeah. Well, with me, I chose the name Katie because that was the name that my parents would have called me if I'd have been assigned female at birth, and I've always
nice.
and I've always known that, and so it made it really easy for me, and I liked the name anyway. So there's a lot of people that said, because my old name was Martin, a lot of people said, "Oh, why couldn't you just put an A on the end or an E on the end, make it Martine or Martina?" But yeah, I always knew that my parents would have called me Katie if I'd been assigned female at birth. So.
And you still didn't pick Karen, given we've got all those days about Karen.
Yeah. But
I mean, that's the only name that actually I feel a bit sorry for at the moment, because Karen ends up being part of so many memes or, sort of various.
It does, yeah. And I've got a really good friend who's called Karen, and she's sort of picked up on this, and she put a thing on Facebook recently about it, and yeah. Yeah, and she's absolutely lovely.
Yeah, that's what I've experienced as well.
Yeah, so
some of my favourite people I've ever worked with are called Karens. So
yeah,
it's like become a
yeah. So, well, thanks ever so much for being today's cool person, Leng. I really, really, really appreciate it.
It's been lovely to chat with you, and finally we've had our chat about things, even though we still yet have our coffee or our.
I know. Well, we'll put that right, definitely. So
definitely, I look forward to that.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thanks ever so much, and thanks to you at home for watching this. And please catch up with the next cool person. I wonder who it's going to be.
Ooh.